Luke Cage, episode 11, Now You're Mine. Really enjoyed this episode. I think, depending on what happens in the next two, if Shades doesn't end up getting killed, which I don't think he will, I assume he's going to be the big bad for the next season because he was getting super pissed off in this episode with Diamondback. Like every time they had a conversation, it's like, all right, so you did this. You don't really have a plan. You just think, the cops are just going to let us walk out of here. There's no other, they didn't work there, so they didn't actually know about some of the secret, entrances and stuff like that. So Shades was just pissed, like, this whole episode with Diamondback. And they mentioned, I think it was, like, during their final, conversation, Diamondback was like, if we get out of this, you and I are gonna have a real long talk, because he was getting pissed off. Like, man, he's really stepping up to me, and that was kind of the big thing when Diamondback first came into Harlem's Paradise, when he like put the gun on him and stuff. And it's like, why shouldn't I kill you right now? So I like that dynamic because he's supposed to, that was his whole thing when he came in. He's like, I'm working for Diamondback. Diamondback tells you what to do and stuff like that. And then when Diamondback finally comes into the show officially, it seems like all they do is bicker with each other because Shades is like, I was following this dude, and now he's come in to actually handle things himself, and he's acting like a dumbass. Like, he's just like, let's shoot up the whole place, let's have this plan, which, the plan enough, the plan was simple enough where it worked in the first sense, where it's like, step one, tell people Luke Cage did it. It's like, yeah, he's public enemy number one right now anyway. That's super easy. That's not really a big plan. And then other than that, it's like hold hostages and make fake demands, and there's nothing that he cared about doing outside of getting Luke. And it's like, you got to think of all the factors, and he just wasn't. So I really like that dynamic where they were just dealing with each other, and Shades was just like, man, excuse me, like he was just getting pissed off. Like, you don't have an idea of what's really happening here. You're just kind of going off the cuff, and that's not going to play out too well for us because they have buildings surrounded. That's not going to work. So I like that dynamic a lot because I think that's kind of a clue as to what they're going to do with Shades, unless, like I said, he does end up getting killed off in like these last two episodes. But I always figured that he was going to survive and be like a main villain in the next season. I just felt like that was, just from the beginning, I kind of felt like that was meant to be, what happened with this character. He was always kind of like number two to the, big bads, and then season two, he might be the big bad or something like that. But I like that dynamic of it. Going through a bit more of Luke and I'm trying to think of his actual name, Willis. Especially they did the what you're talking about Willis thing. That was funny. But going through more of Luke and Willis's history and stuff, I really enjoyed that. And Willis talking about how he was the firstborn child, really, of Luke's dad, but he was like the illegitimate kid of the other woman, and everything was fine until Luke rolls around, and then it's like, oh wow, he's the miracle child because you know uh, Mr. Preacher Lucas was trying with his wife to have a child for so long, and then finally they have a child, and he's the miracle child and stuff, and it's like, man, once that came along, I was kind of screwed. Like, no matter what I did, how good I was, it was all about Carl Lucas because he was the miracle child. And then and we get to learn the history of what happened and what made Diamondback really hate Luke, even though he really should have hated his own father way more than Luke. But it's one of those kind of displacement things where you just, whoever you can target, that's who you end up targeting, I think. And I feel like that's the way it worked. Where it's like, we got into this situation, we stole like a little red Corvette, and it was over before it began. But Preacher Lucas, his golden boy, convinced the judge to let him go to the military. And me, I went to juvie, which in juvie, 2 days in, I got attacked, and I killed someone in self-defense, and then boom, I do hard time, and that's pretty much all there was to it. He did hard time, and during that hard time, his mother died, I believe he said, of cancer, and she died alone because his father, or their father, he was able to kind of get rid of her. It's like, well, I don't have this kid jumping around, to keep on me. He's in prison, so cool, he's out of the way, and now she's got nothing. The kid's in prison, she can't really come after me for much, and he just kind of gets rid of her. He puts her aside. Of course, Luke's mom didn't give a crap. We learned that in the last episode where she's like, I forgot the argument that they had, but she's like, you better keep your mouth shut or the money's gonna stop coming. So they knew what the deal was, and the preacher, Father Lucas, he was paying that money to to the other woman, his secretary actually. Classic story. It's the secretary, but it was really interesting, and he goes through his backstory, and it was really traumatic. It was like, man, this really sucks. They grew up as best friends, and they were brothers that didn't know that they were brothers. And even his story, when I was listening to it, at least I may have missed a couple things, but I felt like he didn't even know really. Um, until he got much older. He kind of said the same thing Luke said in the last episode. Like, there was always kind of this air, around us. There's always like these looks and stuff, but we just grew up as best friends, and everybody kind of knew except for us. That same sort of thing. So when he went through his story, I was like, this is actually a really good moment. And even Luke didn't know all of about this stuff, with his father and exactly what happened in Diamondback and everything like that. So it was interesting. And, when he hears about his mom, he's like, she died just alone. Like she died by herself with no one to really care for her. And that kind of gave Luke a bit of pause. He's like, I'm so, even when they run into each other, he's like, I'm really sorry to hear about your mom. And I was like, man, that just shows like how crazy things were, all because of their father. To be totally honest, it wasn't either of them; it was their father. And it was just very interesting. I was like, I actually really liked that portion, and of course, Diamondback kind of went full crazy with the super fist thing, and he killed the one dude, which might make Mariah actually super happy because she's like, oh man, that competition. That's so sad to see him go, and now he's gone, and she's like, well, there's really nobody in my way now because he was, which I always thought they had a weird thing because unless I didn't remember, unless I missed something about who that guy was. He was her competition, but maybe because it wasn't like its mayor or anything like that, it wasn't that big of a deal that the competition, that they were constantly talking to each other. Because, when you see people talk to each other and they're like the big competition, you think it'd be a bigger deal, but every scene they're in together, nobody's like, oh man, it's the competition talking to each other. Or like, this is your competition right here. Like the reporter who kind of blindsided Mariah during the report, they don't have any scenes like that when they end up together. It's like, oh, this is your competition, and she's making all these crazy moves and becoming way more popular. How do you feel about this? We don't get any of that, so it's kind of interesting that whenever they talk to each other, it's almost like it's just some random dude talking to her, but I'm pretty sure that was like her competition, and he'd always come in as like, he knew, the way she was playing things, but he is gone. Like, he punched him, and just like that other cop, or the cop that was killed, he's just murdered, and that's all there is to it. So I'm sure Mariah will be like, oh, that sucks. She'll put on her face for the media and stuff, and then it's like, sweet, less competition. I'm on a roll. I'll use his death for my advantage as well, and try to get even more power from this. But everything just goes nuts. You got hostages. Claire, as usual, was super awesome in this, and she convinces the girl to fake like she fainted. But before that, she actually gets the whole story, which I thought was cool. I was like, all right, that helps because they have quite a few people now to prove that Luke is actually innocent from everything, and that Diamondback is the one to do it. So they have the girl that actually, she fakes passes out. I thought she was gonna die. I thought that Diamondback was actually gonna kill her when he like pushed her off the thing, and I was thinking he might just flat out shoot her first and then push her over. But excuse me, fortunately she ends up surviving. So that's one person to help Luke out. Misty does end up surviving, although she has like that crazy wound in her arm that Claire ends up helping her with, where she's like, if you, it'll cut off circulation so you don't bleed out. But if this lasts, if this is here for too long, you can lose your arm. And I recently found out that the character Misty Knight has a metal arm in the comics. I don't think they'll actually do that. If they do, they might save that for like a season 3 type of thing. I don't know how far they're gonna go with like robot arms and stuff like that super early on. So I think that was just a reference to it. They might not do it at all actually, but that was a reference to her character from the comic books where she actually does have a full on metal arm. So I was like, oh, that's a cool reference. That if it had been like I think I found that out like yesterday or something. So if it had been like one day earlier where I saw this episode, I wouldn't have gotten that reference. So I kind of wanted to point that out for people who might not know. I personally don't think they'll do it because it seemed like it didn't last too long. Even though it was kind of freaking me out watching it because she was like, I said I'm fine, and she seemed like she was avoiding help. So it did have me worried a little bit. But I would assume they were able to at least help her out. Like, okay, we have actual medical equipment, not like a dirty dish rag, and we squeeze off the blood circulation. So I'm assuming she actually is fine, but she has a really cool fight scene with Claire where they have to deal with Shades when he finds um, the little underground thing, and he has to fight both of them off, and they actually beat him up and handcuff him, so he does end up getting busted by the end of this episode. Everyone's able to get free because Luke goes in. He once again does the hilarious knockout slap where he just hits people in the head and they pass out. I still think that's like the funniest thing ever. So he does that, and as everything is happening, he gets everybody out. He's able to, fortunately dodge all the Judas bullets and able to survive that. And he kind of gets everybody free. But Zip comes in through like this back door in the office, and he's able to get Diamondback out. So he's still out there. They both end up escaping. And now, by the end of the episode, Luke is actually handcuffed. So he's being taken in by the police. Diamondback is still out there, although he does have people like Misty as well as the drink attendant. Both of them can corroborate the fact that he's innocent, as well as Claire. If they bother listening to her, she had to kind of take off by the end of the episode because she'd just be an accomplice, since they aren't really in listening mode just yet. But maybe that'll be the case. I'm not sure how these last two episodes are going to play out, but I am curious what they do with Mariah. That was another big thing about this episode, is that she was kind of pushing the idea of having the Judas bullets used for the police. And we also got to see, I'm glad I thought of this, because that whole thing tied into a connection to Daredevil, because we got to see, I want to see his ADA, Assistant District Attorney, Towers, and he's from Daredevil season 2. For any of you who may not have seen that, so I was like, oh, that's cool. He came into the show, and they did. That was another little crossover that we got to see. So I enjoyed that. I thought that was pretty cool. They talk about the fact that the chief didn't show up, so that was a big thing. Like, oh, he doesn't want to be here in case things do go bad. So there's a lot of other extra little underground stuff that was happening, where it's like, oh, I don't want to be involved in this because we have crazy new technology happening, and Priscilla, she's like, I don't want to do this because if we show that we have this technology, people are going to somehow get it. It's going to end up on the streets because people are going to want it. Although, unfortunately, she doesn't know that it's kind of coming from the streets itself. So I thought that was an interesting play. It kind of made me like her character, just watching her deal with this really tough situation. I kind of enjoyed how she was trying to figure out, how are we going to make this work? Like, we have to get Misty, we have to save her. She's trying to like stop the tactical team from going in. Like, we can't rush in because we got this crazy situation. Realizing stuff when like the first half of the people came on is like, we might have this all wrong, and Luke Cage might not be the one actually doing all this. So it was kind of cool actually watching her side of it, where it's like she's in this crazy. It was like having a cop drama just thrown right into a superhero situation. I was like, that's actually pretty fun, because she's thrown into like a crazy mess where she take all the blame. Like, the chief doesn't show up. They got crazy super weapons coming in that can kill superhuman people. You got possibly the superhuman guy killing other people, and then you find out that it's not actually him. It might be some other random dude. So I was like, I kind of like watching her deal with all these crazy bits of information flying in one after another. And she's just like, I don't want to use these super weapons because I don't want them on the street. And then kind of knowing where they're coming from and everything, I was like, this is actually kind of fun to watch. So I'm curious, where they'll be taking that, because now that they decided to make it official by the end of the episode, the police will have that. Like, they do have that stuff now. They have the guns and they can take him out, and that's just really interesting how it's going to play out. And it's the lesser version, but it's the mass market version. I think that was like 2 episodes ago, where they had Diamondback talking to Mariah about that. Like, we shorten it down, put him in the normal rounds, and you can have him in machine guns and handguns and everything. So I really enjoyed this one. I like that little aspect of it. Cool to get that little crossover. Like, oh, he's he was a fairly minor character. He did show up quite a bit in the second season because he was the ADA to a fairly important character. So he definitely showed up enough to where I was like, oh, that's that's the dude from Daredevil. So that was a cool little crossover. Of course, the whole issue with the whole club and everything was actually pretty fun to watch. Like I said, Claire was pretty awesome. And I'm excited, going into these last 2 episodes. I'm very excited to see what the heck is going to happen with Diamondback, what's going to happen with Mariah. I assume something's going to happen where she gets taken out in the next episode. She might not die, but I feel like something will officially come out, like this is what she did 100%, and now she can go to prison. And then the final episode, I assume, is going to be Luke taking out Diamondback in either a permanent way or a not so permanent way. But really enjoyed this one, of course. Definitely want to know what you guys thought about it. So please comment below. Let me know your favorite parts, your least favorite parts. And with Shades arrested, like I said, I believe that he'll probably just survive until the next season. But Diamondback is still on the loose. We have, these weapons now are in the hands of the police where they can actually take out Luke. I would love to know what you guys think is going to actually happen with our two villains left and our hero, because we're getting into, like I said, the final two episodes. I don't know if both villains are going to make it to the finale or how that's going to play out, but I would love to know your speculations for how everything's going to play out for these last two. I assume at some point, I mean, they're still not in listening mode, like I said, they arrest Luke and everything, so I assume that he'll eventually just prove his innocence. Maybe they'll just listen to Misty and it's like, hey, this is the dude that attacked me. Facial recognition, here you go. Like, at some point, they just need to look at the evidence that she has, because I'm like, well, they got facial recognition. That wasn't Luke Cage, which I thought would have come up in that episode when she first had it. Like, hey, this is the guy who did it. But even when she talked to her boss, she didn't say, like, hey, this is how I got this information. Like, this guy, Willis Stryker, this is who attacked me, and this is who punched that cop. She didn't really mention that or anything. She kind of, I think she kind of did her own thing, which she shouldn't have done, because it ended up being super dangerous for her. But I think she might have the opportunity in the next episode. But like I said, I want to know how you guys think everything's going to play out for these final two. And of course, what you guys thought about this episode in general. So please comment below, let me know. And thanks for watching.